Old man, you lost? This is a car auction, not a retirement home. Laughter erupted as Elias McCall in his faded military jacket and mud-stained boots walked past the row of trucks. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Moments later, the ground trembled. A black SUV with government plates rolled in, flanked by military Humvees. The crowd fell silent. From the SUV, a decorated general stepped out in full uniform. He didn't glance at anyone else. He walked straight to Elias, stood at attention, and saluted. Gasps rippled through the yard. Phones dropped. No one was laughing now. What happened next would leave the entire town forever changed. Elias McCall, 68 years old. Long before the dust of the auction yard clung to his boots, he had walked very different ground, hostile terrain, foreign cities, silent jungles. He was a soldier, once a special forces operator, during the kind of missions they didn't talk about in newspapers. His records, what little remained, were buried deep in government archives. To most people, he was just another aging farmer with weathered skin and calloused hands. That's exactly how he wanted it. Elias never sought recognition. The war had taken too much already, friends' time, even parts of himself. When he left the army after more than 20 years, he didn't retire into medals and memoirs. He disappeared. He bought a small plot of land outside town and built a life that was quiet, rough, and honest. He grew vegetables, raised chickens, fixed what broke, and most importantly, he raised a son, Nathan McCall. Nathan had his father's eyes, but his mother's heart, soft, generous, idealistic. He didn't follow Elias into combat, but chose his own kind of service, civil affairs. Instead of carrying a rifle through Fallujah, Nathan carried seed packets, soil testing kits, and notebooks filled with crop rotation plans. While other soldiers cleared roads, Nathan built relationships working with local farmers to grow food in war-torn villages, often under the threat of gunfire. He believed food could restore what bombs destroyed, and he was right until the day an IED tore through his convoy during a supply run. Elias received the call on a rainy Tuesday morning. Nathan was gone. They sent back a folded flag and a letter, but no one could send back what Elias had lost. Grief hit like a grenade, loud, violent, and final. For weeks, Elias didn't speak. For months, he couldn't bring himself to enter Nathan's old room. But one day, while cleaning out the garage, he found his son's old delivery notebook. Handwritten routes, drop-off points, names, and notes like, ask about her hip or leave extra tomatoes. He loves those. It wasn't just a food run. It was a lifeline, a mission. That day, Elias sat on the porch until sundown, holding that notebook like it was a living thing. Then he made a decision. He would finish what Nathan started. Every Saturday since Elias loaded crates of produce into the old Ford pickup and drove the same routes. He brought fresh vegetables to elderly veterans, shut-ins, and families no one else remembered. No fanfare, no payment. Just a quiet knock at the door, a few kind words, and a bag of food. And in that, Elias found something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. The truck had become more than a machine. It was a tribute, a vow. It was Nathan's voice echoing in each delivery. When it broke down last month, engine gone, frame rusted through, it felt like losing Nathan all over again. But Elias didn't quit. He sold off some of his tools, cut back on every non-essential expense, and scraped together enough for a modest bid. He circled the auction date on the calendar. Not because he wanted to be there, but because he had to. Because people were still waiting. Because a promise was a promise. And now, standing in that auction yard under the blistering sun, he wasn't thinking about humiliation or pride. He wasn't even thinking about himself. He was thinking about Mrs. Keller, who lived alone and hadn't missed a single Saturday delivery in 2 years. He was thinking about Nathan, who once said, "Sometimes the delivery is just an excuse to check if someone's still okay." And he was thinking about the Silverado. It wasn't just a truck. It was the continuation of love wrapped in worn steel and dusty tires. The auction yard buzzed with the kind of confidence money tends to bring. Shiny boots, loud talk, fast deals. Young contractors with mirrored sunglasses and Bluetooth earpieces scanned vehicles with the swagger of men who always expected to win. Pickup trucks weren't just tools. Here they were trophies, symbols of success. Bragging rights parked in the driveway. In the middle of all that noise, Elias McCall stood out like a page torn from a different book. His clothes weren't clean. His boots weren't new. His jacket, army issue from a war 2 generations back, hung loose over his lean frame. The patches were sun-faded, some half unstitched, but he wore it anyway. Not for show, not for sentiment, but because it reminded him who he still was. He moved through the lot with quiet focus, consulting a small notebook he kept tucked in his back pocket. On each page, penciled notes about engine types, towing capacity, mileage, known mechanical issues, his own research done late at night under a single bulb in the kitchen. He didn't have money to waste. Every dollar had a job to do. He stopped in front of a 2010 Chevrolet Silverado. White single cab, no frills. A little rust on the wheel wells, but otherwise solid. He ran his hand along the truck bed, checking for damage, checking for truth. His fingers were rough with decades of work, and he knew the language of dents and wear better than most mechanics. Behind him, the laughter started again. There's Grandpa, still shopping for his time machine. Think he brought Confederate dollars or war bonds. More laughter, this time louder, closer. Elias didn't turn around. The young man behind the comments, Tyler, maybe 22, with slicked back hair and aviator glasses, lifted his phone and started recording. "Y'all get this," he snickered. "Gramps is about to outbid us with his pension check." Elias remained still, eyes focused on the Silverado. He checked his notes one more time. He had $8,500 to his name, and he was willing to spend every last cent if it meant keeping Nathan's promise alive. An auction assistant approached him, clipboard in hand. The look on the young man's face said everything, polite enough not to be rude, but skeptical enough to think Elias didn't belong. "Sir, are you here to bid?" the assistant asked, glancing Elias up and down. "I am," Elias replied, handing over his registration and bank letter without hesitation. The assistant scanned the paperwork, eyebrows raising slightly, then nodded. "Lot 47, Silverado, should come up in the next half hour." Elias nodded and walked toward a bench near the edge of the yard, ignoring the glances, the whispers, the dismissive smirks. He pulled out a thermos and took a slow sip of water, his back straight, posture sharp. Habits didn't die easy. A few yards away, Harlan Reed, a retired Army Sergeant Major, sat quietly. He hadn't said a word, but his eyes had been fixed on Elias for the last 10 minutes. Something about the way the man moved, the way he scanned the trucks, the way he wore that uniform jacket without a trace of vanity, it stirred something in Harlan's memory. Then he saw it, a small green notebook in Elias's breast pocket, faded but unmistakable. Every man from Operation Prairie Ghost had carried one just like it. That wasn't something you bought at a store. That was something you earned. Harlan pulled out his phone, and walked away from the crowd. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "This is Reed. Authorization code Charlie Tango 17. Get me General Whitaker." The wind picked up, and in the distance, the rumble of approaching engines began to echo across the fairgrounds. Something was coming, and for the first time all day, Elias McCall wasn't alone. Harlan Reed stepped away from the main auction yard, finding a quieter corner near the restrooms, where cell reception was stronger and curious eyes were fewer. His hands, still steady after decades of command, moved with precision as he entered a string of numbers into his phone, an old contact protocol few civilians had ever seen, let alone used. "This is Sergeant Major Reed," he said, voice calm but urgent. "Authorization code Charlie Tango 17. I need to speak with General Samuel Whitaker immediately. Tell him it's about Elias McCall." There was a pause on the line. Then the reply came sharp and professional. "Stand by. Suckered Fernandon." Borussia back at the auction, Elias McCall remained seated on the bench, his eyes fixed on Lot 47, the Silverado. It was only a few vehicles away from going up. His fingers traced the corner of his notebook unconsciously, a ritual formed in younger years under harsher skies. The voices of the boys had quieted for now, though he could still feel the occasional glance, the quick whispers. He didn't care. Not anymore. He was here for something larger than pride. In his breast pocket was a photograph, worn soft at the edges. Nathan in uniform, smiling in the Iraqi sun, standing beside a small garden he'd helped local farmers build. He'd written on the back in faded blue ink, "It matters, Dad. Even if it's small, it matters." Several hundred miles away, a phone rang inside an unmarked office at a military installation. Lieutenant General Samuel Whitaker, a towering man with graying temples and a sharp jawline, picked up. When he heard Harlan's voice and the name Elias McCall, he stood from his desk almost instinctively. "Are you sure?" he asked. "No doubt in my mind," Harlan replied. "The jacket, the notebook, and something about his eyes, Sam. That man's carried ghosts longer than most of us have been retired." Whitaker turned toward the window, silent for a beat. "We thought he was dead. Most legends are." The line went quiet for a moment. Then the general said firmly, "Text me your coordinates. I'll be there within the hour." He didn't call for permission. He didn't call for press. He called for the convoy. Meanwhile, the auctioneer's chant rolled on vehicle after vehicle sold to dealers and contractors. Lot 46 was announced and rolled forward a sleek SUV that had no use on a farm. Elias barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the Silverado Lot 47, still parked off to the side, under the shade of a weather-worn canopy. His fingers closed around the photograph one more time. Less than a mile away, the convoy was already forming. A black SUV with government plates was cleaned and fueled. Two desert tan Humvees were pulled from the motor pool, each manned by uniformed soldiers from a nearby base who knew better than to ask questions. When General Whitaker gave an order, it was followed, especially when it came with the kind of solemn weight few people ever heard in his voice. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked. Whitaker glanced at his watch. "County Fairgrounds." "And step on it." As the vehicles pulled out onto the road, dust kicked into the air. Nearby drivers slowed instinctively, recognizing that this was not a normal motorcade. This was something else entirely. Back at the auction, the sun was beginning to dip, just slightly, casting long shadows over the lot. Elias stood up, stretched his back slowly, and walked closer to the Silverado as it was finally rolled into position. Tyler nudged one of his friends and whispered, "He actually thinks he's going to win it." They laughed again. But across the yard, Harlan Reed stood still, eyes on the road. Because he heard it before anyone else, the low, unmistakable rumble of approaching engines. Something was coming, and the world was about to remember exactly who Elias McCall was. The auctioneer adjusted his mic and cleared his throat with theatrical energy. "Next up, Lot 47, a 2010 Chevy Silverado. 110,000 miles. Clean title. Minor cosmetic wear. Strong engine. Starting bid at $6,000, do I hear six?" A pause. Then from the side of the yard, Elias McCall raised his paddle. No hesitation, no fanfare. 6,000, the auctioneer called. "Do I hear 6,500? Another bidder, a man in a crisp button-down shirt and mirrored shades, lifted his paddle casually. 6,500. Now 7, Elias raised his again. 7,000. Across the yard, Tyler and his friends smirked. They hadn't stopped watching Elias since he stood up. Phones were out again, cameras rolling. 7,500, the auctioneer prompted. 7,500, someone called. Elias didn't even blink. 8. A ripple went through the crowd. People started paying attention. This old man in worn boots was serious. 8,500, the auctioneer asked. Elias raised his paddle one last time. 8,500, he said. His voice was calm, solid. That was his limit. Every dollar he had scraped together, his entire savings down to the last cent. The auctioneer's rhythm faltered for half a breath, surprised the old man was still in the game. "Do I hear 9,000? The man in the button-down raised his paddle. 9,000, the auctioneer called, now excited again. "Do I hear 9,500? Elias didn't move. He lowered his paddle slowly, his face unreadable. He had reached the wall. From the edge of the yard, Harlan Reed watched the whole exchange. His arms crossed tight, the veteran's brow furrowed. He had seen Elias hold his ground through firefights and foreign ambushes. But watching him lower that paddle, it felt heavier than surrender. Harlan's phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen. ETA 2 minutes. He smiled grimly and stepped away toward the front gate. Back in the auction ring, the bidding on the Silverado slowed. 9,000 going once, the auctioneer said. Elias turned back toward the bench where he'd been sitting. He moved slowly without bitterness. There was disappointment, yes, but no shame. Going twice. Then it came. A low, thunderous rumble, distant at first but growing louder. The ground beneath the crowd vibrated ever so slightly. A few heads turned, then more, then everyone. From the main road leading into the fairgrounds, a black SUV with government plates turned onto the gravel path. Its windows were tinted, the vehicle polished to a mirror shine. Behind it came 2 desert tan Humvees moving in tight formation. Dust kicked up behind the convoy as it rolled steadily through the auction gates. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Phones once raised to mock were now raised in confusion and curiosity. "What the hell is this?" one man muttered. Tyler stopped recording and lowered his phone, his smirk fading into something uncertain. The auctioneer fell silent, his mic still on, but his voice gone. The SUV came to a slow, deliberate stop just outside the bidding circle. The two Humvees parked in perfect symmetry on either side. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the rear door of the SUV opened, and from the shadows of the back seat, a tall man in a full military dress uniform stepped out. His chest was heavy with medals, his posture straight as a steel rod. The insignia on his shoulder was impossible to miss a three-star general. He said nothing. He looked across the crowd straight toward Elias McCall. The general's hand rose slowly to his brow, and with all the precision of a battlefield salute, he honored the man no one believed was worth noticing. The yard stood in stunned silence, the kind that makes even the breeze feel like an interruption. Elias McCall turned slowly, brow furrowed, unsure if his eyes were deceiving him. The man approaching him was unmistakable General Samuel Whittaker, now standing tall in his full-dress uniform, his rows of ribbons and gleaming stars catching the afternoon light. But it wasn't the medals that silenced the crowd. It was the salute. Precise, sharp, deeply personal. Elias stiffened instinct, pulling his posture upright. He returned the salute slowly, deliberately, his weathered hand rising with grace that came from muscle memory, not pride. Their eyes met two men who had lived in the shadow of war, carrying stories no civilian could ever fully understand. "Master Sergeant Elias McCall," Sir General Whittaker said firmly. "Permission to approach." "Granted," Elias replied, his voice quiet, grounded, and full of weight. "But drop the formality. We've seen too much for that." The two men shook hands, then embraced with the kind of brief, powerful hug shared only between warriors who've shared something unspoken. Around them, the onlookers began to murmur. Cameras slowly came back out, not to mock, but to document. Tyler, his phone still in hand, stood frozen. General Whittaker turned to face the auctioneer, who was still holding the mic in shock. "That vehicle," Whittaker said, pointing to the Silverado, "has been acquired by the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. It's no longer up for public bid." A young aide stepped forward, dressed in a dark suit, holding a leather portfolio. He handed it to the auctioneer, who quickly scanned the contents. His hands trembled as he nodded. "Everything appears in order," he stammered. Whispers swept through the yard. "Who is that guy? What's going on?" Then another vehicle pulled into the lot, this one bearing the Army Special Forces insignia on its door. Four soldiers in formal dress stepped out and formed an honor guard near Elias. One of them, a command sergeant major with a chest full of decorations, carried a small wooden box lined with velvet. "Master Sergeant McCall," he began, voice firm but reverent, "on behalf of the Secretary of the Army and the United States Special Operations Command, I am honored to present to you the Distinguished Service Cross awarded posthumously to your son, Captain Nathan McCall, for extraordinary heroism during Operation Crimson Dawn in Fallujah." Elias's expression didn't break, but his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the box. Inside lay the metal bronze and proud, resting on blue silk, the second highest military honor a soldier can receive. A medal Nathan had earned, but never lived to see. Elias whispered, "He never told me." "The mission was classified until last month," Whittaker replied. "He saved his entire unit and 27 Iraqi civilians by driving a burning fuel truck away from a village before it exploded. He knew it wouldn't end well for him, but he did it anyway." Elias looked down at the medal, then slowly closed the box. 27 people. The same number of families Nathan had served through the food program before deploying. The same number Elias had been delivering to ever since. The command sergeant major continued. "Additionally, the Foundation has secured and outfitted the Silverado to support Captain McCall's community initiative." Another soldier handed Elias the keys. The truck now bore a magnetic decal, "McCall Mission," feeding those who served. A woman in the crowd stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "My father, he was one of Nathan's deliveries. He never told me who brought the food. Just said a kind young man made sure I never felt forgotten." Others followed, veterans, widows' families. One by one, they told their stories. Tyler stood alone, head-low, phone still recording, but not for mockery anymore. Now it was proof. Proof of something sacred, and a lesson he would never forget. The Silverado hadn't moved an inch, yet everything around it had shifted. The truck, once just a battered auction item, now stood like a monument, emblazoned with the words "McCall Mission," feeding those who served. A symbol not only of service, but of something this town had nearly forgotten: dignity in silence and power in kindness. One by one, the crowd approached Elias McCall. It started with a woman in her late 50s, her voice trembling. My dad was in a wheelchair. Every Saturday, someone left a crate of vegetables by our door. We never knew who it was. Just a note, "You're not forgotten." It meant everything. Next came a retired mechanic who had once served in Korea. Then a former nurse, a widow, a boy, who remembered a visit years ago where Elias brought tomatoes and a smile. Each voice layered upon the last building, a picture of a quiet network of compassion that had lived right beneath their noses, powered by the legacy of a fallen soldier in the hands of his father. Tyler, who had laughed the loudest earlier, stood off to the side, visibly shaken. His mother appeared beside him, eyes wet. "Mr. McCall," she said softly, "I didn't know. My father, he passed last year. But every Saturday, he looked forward to that knock at the door. He never missed a meal, never felt alone." Elias offered a quiet nod. "That was your father?" he asked. She nodded. "He wouldn't let us thank whoever did it. Said the man didn't want credit, only to be remembered." For once, Tyler had nothing to say. His voice caught somewhere between guilt and awakening. I was wrong, sir," he finally muttered. "I didn't know who you were, what you were doing." "No one ever does," Elias replied gently. "That's how judgment works. We decide without the whole story." The young man lowered his head, ashamed. But Elias placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Now you do." With the next Sunday, before the sun had fully risen, a pickup truck rolled out of the McCall farm again. But this time, Elias wasn't alone. Tyler was in the passenger seat, holding a crate of fresh squash and tomatoes. He hadn't been asked. He had just shown up. And not long after, others began to follow. A few high school students, a couple of young veterans who'd heard the story, even some of the families Elias had once served. What began as a lonely ritual of remembrance slowly grew into a community movement. The Silverado's bed was upgraded with insulated storage. New crates were built. Routes expanded to neighboring counties. Donations started coming in from people who had never met Nathan but felt like they had through the mission he left behind. The town's local newspaper ran a feature, "The McCall Mission, from Battlefield to Backyard." But Elias refused interviews. "This isn't about me," he told them. "It's about showing up, quietly, faithfully, whether you're thanked or not." Though cameras tried to capture him, he always turned away. In every photo, he was either in motion or standing in the background. He never wore his son's medal, never mentioned the general, never brought up the convoy. The story spread anyway, and the mission kept going. Somewhere along the way, Tyler became the project's most dedicated volunteer. He learned to grow harvest pack and deliver, not out of penance but out of purpose. His old friends barely recognized him. "Whatever changed you?" one of them asked. Tyler didn't answer right away. He simply pointed to the truck decal and said, "That man fed a town while we laughed at his boots." Elias McCall never stood in front of a podium. He never wore his medals, never accepted a single invitation to be honored, and never once agreed to a television interview. He simply went back to work. Every Sunday morning, the sound of the Silverado's engine rolling down the gravel path became a familiar comfort to those who had come to depend on its arrival. But now it wasn't just Elias behind the wheel. Sometimes it was Tyler, sometimes one of the high school volunteers, and sometimes a veteran paying it forward. Elias guided them all, not with speeches, but with quiet example. He never asked for recognition, because in his words, recognition doesn't grow tomatoes or feed old veterans. Work does. As weeks turned to months, the McCall mission became more than a tribute. It became a movement. Churches offered storage space. Retired farmers donated land. Local businesses chipped in with fuel crates, even new tires for the Silverado. What started as a promise from a father to his fallen son soon spread across the county and then across the state. Young people who had never spoken to a veteran before now spent weekends loading crates, learning about food insecurity, and hearing stories that never made it into textbooks. The gap between generations began to close, one delivery at a time. And Elias, he stayed the same, humble, steady, committed. When a reporter finally caught up to him at a farmer's market and asked, "Do you consider yourself a hero?" Elias just chuckled. "No, ma'am," he said. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a father keeping a promise." He looked off toward the volunteers packing boxes nearby. "The world's full of heroes," he added. "They're just too busy helping to call themselves that." As the camera pans away from the story of Elias McCall, we're reminded that dignity doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just shows up week after week, mile after mile, for the people who need it most. In a world that moves faster than ever, where status is measured by noise and attention, the story of Elias McCall reminds us of something quietly powerful. You don't have to be loud to make a difference. You just have to show up. Elias didn't fight for praise. He didn't post about his work or ask for recognition. He honored his son's legacy the way true Americans always have, with action, not words. His story speaks to a generation that remembers when neighbors knew each other, when a promise meant something, and when service to others wasn't a performance, but a responsibility. And maybe that's the question we should ask ourselves today. In a time of division, could kindness be the quiet revolution we need? We want to hear from you. Have you known someone like Elias? Someone who served quietly, faithfully, without asking for thanks? What would America look like if we all lived with that same quiet purpose? Or tell us, what does service mean to you, especially now? Comment below, share your story, start the conversation. Keep the values alive. And if this story moved you, helped you reflect, or reminded you of something important, like the video, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories coming, stories of honor, legacy, and the forgotten heroes still among us. Because as Elias proved, you don't need a spotlight to shine. You just need to keep your promise. Thank you for watching, and as always, respect to those who serve and those who remember.